Tutors, mentors, and the city with your host.com.
The City Tutors presents
Tutors, mentors, and the city
with your host.com.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Kevin.com Brown, and thank you for joining us on Tutors, Mentors, and the City. And like I do every episode, please join me in enthusiastically welcoming our guest, Mr. Lou DePaoli. Yay! Lou, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you, Kevin?
Doing well. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. And I know you're a very busy man. I can see, I never know what my first question is.
Yeah.
Until something triggers it. So I see in the little name thing on the Zoom screen, it says General Sports Worldwide.
Yes, sir.
That sounds very powerful.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, so instead of asking my first question, my first question has been, a pattern's been forming where my first question is typically, who are you? But I'm not going to do that.
Okay.
My first question is going to be, General Sports Worldwide. What is that? Tell us more about that.
Oh, that's great. Look, and I appreciate that. So General Sports Worldwide is a full-service sports agency, based just outside of Detroit in Rochester, Michigan. We have employees all over the world that focus on various verticals within the sports industry. So we represent athletes, right? So we have an agency practice down in Jacksonville that represents some NFL players. We have an agency in London that represents right now about 120 different athletes, mostly soccer or football, as it's called there, and some various other sports and athletes. We're in the M&A business as it relates to sports or mergers and acquisitions. We do sponsorship brokering for teams selling jersey patch rights and stuff like that. And then my division here, based in North America, is focused on three major things, which is executive recruiting, consulting, and training.
Okay, so like I thought, it sounds very powerful. And so you mentioned offices or affiliations all across the world, but where'd you say you were located?
So our headquarters are based in Rochester, Michigan. But all of us work remotely. So I work out of my home on Cape Cod.
Okay.
Right? And my team, they're based in Nashville, Dallas, Chicago, Phoenix. And then we have a ton of people in London in the UK.
Okay, so did this remote working start after the pandemic, or was that a business model before the pandemic?
This was the business model before. I joined, post-pandemic. I've been doing this for a little over 2 years. But yeah, the business model was the same, right? Headquartered in Michigan, people down in Jacksonville, Florida, people in London, like just everybody does their own thing. And what's nice is that we're all a bunch of seasoned sports executives. We've all been in this business probably 20 years minimum, some of us 30 years or more. But we all know each other. We all get along great. We're adults. It's okay. You can work remotely. We get it done and we do really well.
Okay. So prior to the 2 years that you've been with, what do we call it? GSW?
We all call it GSW. Yes,
okay.
Yes, we do.
Okay. So prior to you coming to GSW, what did you do right before that?
So right before that, I spent 7.5 years as executive vice president for the New York Mets.
For the Mets? My Mets?
Your Mets, Kevin. Your Mets.
Man, okay. That's really dope. The Mets was my first baseball team. My first baseball card was Tom Seaver when I was a kid.
Yep.
I was a fan of his, and then in '86 with the Strawberries and the Hernandezes and so I'm
Doc.
Yeah. So I'm a New York guy and I'm a Mets guy. Even though I live in the Bronx, you would think everybody in the Bronx is Yankees, but when I became a Mets fan, Tom Seaver was just everything.
Yeah. No, I get it. So look, it was a fun 7.5 year run. I mean, my role there was to oversee the business operations. So you name it, anything on the business side of the organization, minus HR, finance, and legal, right? Everything else, sales, marketing, events, parking, the grounds crew, the union, like you name it, that was what I oversaw.
Wow. Okay. Okay. So that's a pretty big operation over there. So let's back up a little bit. So let's go into the origins of Lou. All right.
Sure. Yep.
Where did it all start? Where are you from?
So I was born in Westchester, right? I was actually born in Mount Kisco, New York. And at the time we lived in Bedford. And then we wound up moving into Stamford when I was younger. And then eventually moved up to Danbury, which is where I wound up graduating high school.
Okay. Okay. So you went from Westchester to Connecticut.
Yep.
Not much difference. Not much difference, right? Pretty much, just a
Pretty
border.
much the same. Pretty much the same. And most of my family is still in Westchester. And then I went off to school. I went off to UConn. I eventually graduated from UMass. Got married, lived in Massachusetts for about 10 years. The first 8 years or so I spent in the insurance business. I actually started my own insurance brokerage when I was 24. And then eventually I had an opportunity to get into sports. And then I went from minor league hockey. I was down in Miami with the Marlins. I went to the NBA league office in Midtown. I went from there down to the Atlanta Hawks. And then I went out to Pittsburgh for the Pirates and then back to New York for the Mets before I decided to do this.
Okay, so it sounds like you had you built a really good foundation for yourself. So let's go back to, you said you went to UConn. UConn is a huge school, right? Isn't it? I know they had a great basketball team, but
UConn is a very large school. But I went there, Kevin, when they weren't so good. Before that run happened, where the men's team was really good, the women's team is just dominated. I was there just prior to that.
Okay.
So I saw some bad UConn, well, not bad, but not great UConn teams. But I had the pleasure of seeing some of those great St. John's teams, right, with Chris Mullen and Walter Berry, right, and Glass, and then seeing obviously Ewing at Georgetown. I mean, just the Big East. Chris Mullen up at St. John's, and Pearl up in Syracuse. So I got a chance to watch all those guys play against UConn. So it was fun.
Yeah, that was a beautiful time. That's a beautiful time to be a New Yorker, because coming from New York, we're not a college basketball town at all.
No.
But those areas, when I remember, I guess I might have been about the same age as all these guys, but I remember being at the club when a Walter Berry would walk in or something like that, or Chris Mullen would come through.
Yeah.
So, but those were some fun. Those were some fun times. So, what was your major in college?
Sport marketing.
Sport marketing. All right.
Yep. Always wanted to get into sports, Kevin. My whole career. Look, I wanted to be a basketball player growing up, right? But I'm currently 6'2", right? But I was 6'2" at 14.
Okay.
So I was thinking, and I've got some cousins who are 6'5", 6'6". So I thought, okay, if I get to about 6'6", I might be good enough to get a shot. And then you realize I'm 6'2", and everybody else started to be 6'6", 6'7". I'm like, okay, I'm probably not going to the NBA. Maybe I'll become a broadcaster. So that really became my first goal when I went to college, was I wanted to be a sportscaster. Play-by-play, color, whatever it took. And then you realize that's a tough nut to crack too. And I just decided, you know what? I've always had a head for business. I'm lucky that I'm gifted, mathematically. So I said, you know what? Maybe the business is the way to go. And that's eventually where I wound up getting into.
Okay, so you said you went to UConn, but you ultimately went to UMass.
Yeah.
All right. So not a whole lot of difference, right? From UConn to UMass. And same major, you just changed locations.
Yep. Sport marketing.
All right. So you graduate. What does sports marketing give you? A BA, BS? What is that?
You know what? I believe it's a BS. So
okay.
I have a lot of BS, Kevin.
Yes, there's a lot of that going around. A lot of that. All right. So you got your bachelor's. Okay.
Yep.
And what do you do directly out of college?
So it's probably I have to take a step back. So, the whole picture is, I went to UConn and then I got married, right? So I wound up getting married at a young age. And, I wound up then having to go back to UMass many years later and doing it online. So I wound up getting married at 19.
Wow.
And then, again, started my own insurance business when I was my own brokerage when I was 24. So left school completely at 19 years old, and then wound up years later when I was already a vice president at that point for the Marlins. I was a vice president at the NBA league office. And then luckily for me, a coworker and my mentor were both former professors. And they said, and by the way, they've written the textbook on sport marketing called Intro to Sport Marketing. And they said, you know what? You're too smart not to have a degree. Like, you got to go back and get your degree. I'm like, yeah, I'm good. They're like, no, you need to get your degree. So I said, all right, fine. So I wound up taking a whole bunch of classes online, and I finished 2 years in about a year and a half, doing it all online and then writing like an experiential paper, kind of like a capstone type project. And I wound up getting my degree from UMass while I was literally traveling all over the world for the NBA.
Let's talk about that moment for a second, because the demographic at City Tutors, City, for viewers that may not be familiar, City Tutors was founded 10 years ago. We're a not-for-profit startup. We provide free tutoring and mentorship to anybody, mostly New Yorkers, but anybody from 5 to 55, 6 to 66.
Yep.
But when we do our live events, our biggest demographic is college students in the CUNY system, City University of New York.
Yep.
So what we look for when I do these interviews is something in the trajectory that you experience that a student might be experiencing right now and trying to figure out how to deal with it. And you probably stumbled on in your story a trifecta of things, right? So I tell my students, I just became an adjunct professor at Hunter College. I just started, and I'm in week 5, right?
Great.
So my students are the best and the brightest high school students from around New York City. They graduated. They're in this Macaulay Honors program. So there's a whole bunch of first semester very smart kids.
Yeah.
So I say to them, how many of y'all are in relationships? And they look around at each other. They timid to put their hands up. And I say, if you're not in a relationship, good, because it's not going to last anyway, right? I tell all the smart kids, if you're in a relationship, break up right now. It's never going to work out. And, I'm being facetious, but then I'm being serious, but then I'm being facetious, right? So you got married at 19.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about the implications of that. You were a young college student. You meet the love of your life, and then you have some decisions to make. You got to talk to your parents about a pivot you have to make. There's a lot of implications of that. Let's unpack that for a minute.
Yeah, look, I mean, that's there's a lot that happened back then, so we got married. We were also pregnant at the same time, right? So wound up then having to tell, obviously, my parents, her parents, moved from Connecticut. I moved up to Massachusetts, right? Because that's where she was from. I moved to her town. And then, okay, I got to get an apartment. I got to get a job. But I'm very, I'm very confident in my abilities, even at 19 years old, that I'm going to do this on my own. Like, we're going to figure this out. We're not taking money from anybody. I'm not taking any help from anyone. We're going to do this on our own. And we did. It's funny. So my wife, she's still married to me 37 years later, Kevin.
Wow.
Right. And we've got 2 great kids and now 2 granddaughters. It's amazing. But it's one of those things where, we were so both of us determined, I think, because we were both athletes and athletic and competitive. We were like, you know what? Yeah, we know the statistics are against us. We know that. But you know what? We're going to show people. And within 5 years, we bought a house. I started a business, and we had raised 2 great kids. But it's not easy when you're first doing that on your own. And I always tell people, like, for me, I was like a bull in a china shop. I just put my head down. So I'm just going to keep working. I'm going to keep pressing, and we're going to make this work, right? So you put everything on your back and you just go. And I tell people now, looking back, if I had to do it over, I probably would have found some mentors, right? Found somebody that I could talk to, not put the blinders on and the earmuffs. Don't listen to anybody. Don't look at anybody. I've got this 100%. And it worked out. My wife and I, we made it work. She worked as hard as I did, right? But it's one of those things where now, and this is what I coach people all the time on, and we'll talk about mentorship in a second, right? And why it's such a passion of mine. But, you need to find people who can help you through things. And maybe they could have helped us from making one or two small mistakes here and there. You could have learned, you could have saved yourself a lot of angst by asking somebody like, hey, you know what, have you been in this situation, or could you at least provide me some guidance? It doesn't hurt you to ask or raise your hand. It's okay. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. So that's probably the one thing I tell people all the time. If I had to do it all over again, I definitely would have been asking people for more advice, for sure, and finding some mentors. Because later in my career, I wound up having mentors, and then now I've mentored a ton of people. That's why I love to give back, and that's why I'm so proud of what you're doing here with the City Tutors. I think that makes all the sense in the world. People need to know that there's options out there, and you need a network, and you need people you can trust and count on.
Absolutely. So you are the poster child for how wrong my statement is when I tell all the young, smart kids, if you're in a relationship, just break up now because it's never going to last.
Yeah. But you know what? Statistics are in your favor, right? We just happened to be the anomaly. You know what I mean? We just had two people that really got it, and it was the right connection. And we both worked really hard to get to where we are. And, like I said, 37 years later, we're still here.
Absolutely. So let's unpack the advice your mentors gave you. I had a similar story. I dropped out of college in '88.
Okay.
You could say I dropped out. I walked away. Mm-hmm. I had 121 credits, and I didn't apply for graduation. I just walked away.
Yeah.
But 121 credits is enough to graduate from most universities.
Yes.
When I went back 33 years later to get my degree, my major wasn't there anymore.
Oh.
and said, yes, you have 121 credits, but you don't have a major to apply them to. So you have to take 30 credits of something to apply those credits. So I ended up going to college to get my degree ultimately.
Wow, good for you.
Yes. So I went back. I got my bachelor's. I'm finishing a master's program now. I fell in love with it. This is all post-pandemic, right? This is all recent.
Yeah, it's recent.
So, but I had a couple of my friends say something similar that your mentor said to you. Kev, you got to get that paper. You had a great career. You're successful in the whole 9 yards, but you got to get that paper. And I went back and I got it. So let's talk about that, because everybody doesn't have the luxury of going back to college. Even if you have the money, you may not have the time.
Yeah.
You don't know if your mind will still work on that academic level. You don't know what kind of obligations. You have to really pivot. You have to really rearrange some things in your life. Let's talk about that moment that helped you actually execute the advice they gave you.
Yeah, I mean, look, people had been telling me that off and on for years, right? And I knew in the back of my mind, like, I got to go back someday. I got to go back. But I'm working literally 70, 80 hours a week. We got a wife, 2 kids. We're living up in Upper Westchester at the time. And I'm like, where am I going to go to school? What am I going to, like, you know what? I don't have the time. And by the way, I'm flying. I traveled for the NBA league office 47 weeks a year. So I'm on the road. I'm all over the country. I don't have time for school. And when they said that, there's an online option, UMass was one of the first, universities to really start offering online courses. And I was like, online. I'm very tech savvy. I love learning, and I love school. So that was never the issue. It was just time, and just making that decision to finally say, I got to go do this. And they kept saying, like, it's online. You could do it, but you still need to come up to Amherst. You're still going to come up to UMass early on for some classes and whatever. And I'm like, how can I do this? So there are special Saturday classes where maybe you'll go up and you'll be there for 4 hours on a Saturday. I'm like, okay. I mean, you know what? Because if I don't do it now, I know I'll never do it. And my wife was like, you have to do this. And she was so supportive. So when it first started off, I'd be traveling all over the country, come home on a Friday. Like I'd land at LaGuardia, drive up to Upper Westchester, see my family, have dinner, and then wake up and be in the car by 6:30 in the morning to drive up to Amherst. And then sometimes there was also like a Sunday course that you had to stay for. So the professor, who was a colleague of mine, let me stay at his house. So I'm like, great. I stayed at his house. I stayed at a hotel a couple times, because I had the wherewithal to be able to do all that. But literally driving up there, then driving home, seeing my family, and then back on Monday on an airplane heading out to who knows where. That happened for a short period of time. And then the rest of it was online. And I was really scrambling to get as much done as I could online, because then I became, obsessed with it. And I know that I had the mental capacity to do more. So I found out what classes I needed to graduate. And some of them weren't available online at UMass. I found courses at other colleges that I could take that would transfer in, right? Online. So I took a genetics course at Mercy, right? I took another history course at Mercy, right? Online. At the same time, I'm taking 6 or 7 other classes at UMass online. And then I just transferred them all in and I graduated. It's the best thing I ever did, because quite honestly, at that point, I had 2 kids and one of them was in high school, and you're starting to think like, she's going to go off to college. Like, her father's got to have a degree. I don't want her ever thinking, hey, I could go down the same path as my dad. He's a vice president at the NBA. He doesn't have a degree. I'm good. So, it was some of that, but also, for yourself, you need to be able to say, yeah, I need that piece of paper, like you said earlier, Kevin.
Yeah, absolutely. My daughter graduated from Howard University.
Nice.
And she got her degree before me.
Yeah.
and I tease her and I say, I don't want you ever thinking you're smarter than daddy, because that's never going to be the case, right? Got her
That's funny. Well, congrats. Howard's a great university.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I have a 14-year-old and I'm grooming her to come to my school, to come to my alma mater. But then her big sister's grooming her to go to hers, and her mother's her to LIU. But so it became a passion. It's become a passion for me also, because I remember I was always a smart guy.
Yeah. But
like for your drives from your house to Amherst, for example, when I first came back to school, I needed audiobooks, right? Mm-hmm. I needed audiobooks, and I took all my textbooks and I signed up for Speechify.
Oh.
So listen while I did long drives.
Yep.
My mind, the muscle is stronger now. So even though I still have Speechify, I have not used it in almost a year, because when I read now, I read differently. I read more. Yeah. And I remember when I first came back to school, when I would read, I'd fall asleep. Like in the middle of the afternoon, I'm reading, and I would hate reading because I don't want to fall asleep in the middle of the day. But that was my own personal burden. Maybe my mind, cobwebs in my brain had to catch up, right? Did you have any hurdles that you ran into as far as completing your education?
No, actually, it was really smooth. I mean, the University of Massachusetts has a specific program designed for this, and it's actually called the University Without Walls. And it was fantastic. I give them a lot of credit. I'm a big supporter. I tell people about it all the time if they're in a similar situation. Most people were people who needed those last 10 or 15 or 20 credits, right? I needed 60 some odd credits, because I was only halfway through.
Right.
So I needed to get in there, but I also didn't want to take a long time. So that's why I really crammed as many courses as I could online. But then there was also like this, like I said, like a capstone type project, you get credit for work experience, and you have to basically write a thesis paper. They told me that the maximum amount of credit you could earn is 33 credits.
Right.
But they'd only given out 1 in the history of the program.
Right.
So I said, okay. I remember telling the professor, I will be number 2. And she was a professor in the English department, not a sports fan. And she was like, well, we'll see. Right. So I go and I write this novel about sports and sports marketing and my history and what I've learned and things that I've coached people on. Just fantastic stuff. Right. And I get it back from her with 29. And I'm like, 29. So I never forget. I reached out to my advisor, my coworker at the time. He was a professor at UMass. I'm like, hey, what did you think of this? He goes, I thought it was awesome. He goes, you should have got 33. I'm like, okay, why am I not getting these 4 points? So eventually I just called her and said, hey, I was striving for 33. Like, where did I miss? Like, there's no comments about my commentary. She's like, I need you to cite just a couple of more sources. And then your formatting on the bibliography wasn't 100% accurate. She goes, if you fix them, I'll give you the other 4 points. I said, you'll have it in an hour. Like that's easy, right? So I went in there and I got the 33 points.
There you go. Now, you were going to say, I cut you off. I was
going to say, I mean, that's 11 classes.
Yeah.
33 credits. And then all the other online stuff that I was doing, before you know it, I got the 60 whatever credits I needed in no time.
That's huge. I ran into a similar situation. They told me about a program at Baruch Grad School or something for adult learning or something like that, Center for Adult Learning. And I went to speak to the young lady, whatever, downtown 23rd Street. And she was a PhD. She had her name on her desk. She was a PhD, but she couldn't be any more than 28 years old. Like, she was a little, right?
Yep.
Now my resume is incredible as far as an actor goes. I had so I'm saying to her, I heard I can get up to 30 something credits for and she immediately shot me down. Well, it's really hard to get that. Nobody really. And I'm like, you don't even know me and you're discouraging me already. And I thought that was very funny, because the thing about it is, brilliant people, right? All of them are brilliant. All of them have PhDs. Everybody. Yes. But they underestimate, right? A guy like you will come in and they'll underestimate, well, I don't know. And sometimes your life experience was what made you make that phone call.
Right.
Was what made you dig a little deeper. Because a lot of times when you're young, somebody will give you 29 credits and you'll go, oh man, I wish I got it. And you just put your head down and move on.
Right.
But that is a powerful,
that's a good lesson, right?
Yeah.
It's a great lesson. Again, I've told that story to a lot of other people too. It's just, sometimes you just have to say, hey, you know what? Where did I fall short? Because I figured it was easier to have a phone call with her. And if she told me that's the best she could give me, then fine, I'd have to go and take 2 more classes. But if she said, hey, there's an opportunity, like, here's really where you fell short and they're fixable. And she said, if you do it, I'll give you the 33. Done. I did that in a heartbeat, and I sent it back to her and I got the 33 credits and I got my diploma. So it's,
That's a powerful, if students who watch this episode don't get anything else out of the conversation, get that out of the conversation. So many things are just simply negotiable, right?
Yeah.
Professors are human, right?
Yes.
We don't know what they're going through in their lives.
No.
We don't care what they're going through in their lives. We're there to get our thing.
Correct.
And if you are really intentional about it, you have to dig a little deeper sometimes. You have to make some inquiries. Now, I tell you what, I tend to tell my students now, this is after my couple of years back in school. It's almost 2024. I came back in 2021.
Okay.
But I tell all my students, send everything in email. You want to create a paper trail, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I think a paper trail is important, because no telling what a professor will say, they said, or whatever.
Correct.
But you, good move. Kudos to you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, look, I had a similar situation not long before that. Again, I got 4.0s in every class I took, right? And one of them was a Stats 2 class, right? I aced everything, whatever. I get to the final. I'm done way before everybody. This was one I had to take in person. And the guy corrects it. He goes through the whole thing. He hands it back to me. 96. I'm like, 96? Which one did I get wrong? He goes, oh, number 23. I'm like, no, that's right. He goes, no, it's wrong. So meanwhile, I'm doing this in front of the class and everybody's kind of listening. And he's like, no, you're wrong. I said, well, let's step outside. I'll show you how I got to my answer. You show me how you get to yours. And he's like, sure. We went outside. And then he came back in. He goes, class, everybody just got 4 free points because there's 2 answers to this question. There are 2 ways to solve it. I never knew that until he just pointed it out to me. I showed him how I did it. And I said, mathematically, you could get 2 answers from this. And he was like, you're right. All right. If you could come up with either one of these 2 answers, you got 4 points thanks to him. But if not, I could have walked out with a 96. I got a 4.0. It didn't matter. Right. But sometimes but without being obnoxious, that's the one thing I try to tell people too. You can't just always be like, well, I'm right. No. There's times when you say, hey, I know I'm right. It's also how you go about it. Right. I just told him, like, you know what? Can we step outside? Let's just show me how you did it and I'll show you how I did mine. And he was like, okay. He's like, darn it, you're right too. There's a second way of doing this problem.
Outstanding.
Like, that's fun. Like that's the stuff I tell people all the time. Don't be afraid to push back a little politely. And then if you're wrong, or if it's not going to change, you move on and just put your head down and get back to work. But those are the things that you need to do, to try to advance the ball, so to speak.
Outstanding. I tell my young students that, like I said, I have my class, my students are first semester freshmen.
Oh, wow.
And one of the things I work on with them, they're brilliant. They're all brilliant. Yeah. But I work on with them, they're still tethered to high school, right? They're still tethered to thinking like the rest of the pack.
Yeah.
And I have to shake them out of it. Like, this is college now. That pack stuff is over with.
Right.
Thinking outside the box and make left turns and challenge everything.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, you go back, you get your degree. Other than a personal victory, other than a personal accomplishment, were you able to use it tangibly in any career moves, or were you already just you were already where you needed to be?
Yeah, I was already where I needed to be. But that said, I wound up leaving the NBA league office and I went down to Atlanta to become their executive vice president, right, with the Atlanta Hawks. We had the hockey team, the Thrashers, and we ran the arena, which is now State Farm. It used to be Phillips Arena. And it was great. My boss at the NBA was my boss in Atlanta. He was the CEO, right? So it was great. No problem. But when I left there, I wound up going to the Pittsburgh Pirates. Now, they hired me. They didn't make a big deal whether you had a degree or not, but I always wonder, what if I didn't have that piece of paper? What if I said, I've got all this experience, but Lou DePaoli doesn't actually have a degree? Right. Would the Pirates have said, well, we're going to pass and go on with somebody else and not say why? Would the Mets have maybe passed on? Like, at some point, someone's going to hold that against me.
Yeah.
So it was tangibly, did it help me? I don't know. But if I didn't have it, I'm not 100% sure I would have been able to have the career that I did.
Yeah, I tell you, on Indeed, we do mentorship events all the time, but on Indeed, if it requires a degree and you try to apply, the app will stop you. The app will throw a roadblock or a question mark. Right. Or you have not, and some things, if you don't have those documents,
right,
you can't even press submit. The submit button never even opens up for you to submit your resume, to submit.
Yeah.
So that is an interesting question. That is interesting.
Absolutely. Because again, who knows, right? You're an accomplished executive.
Yeah.
But with somebody, because again, I'm dealing with the president or the owners of the team. Would one of them say, you know what? We really need, someone has to have a degree in this role. It's a pretty high profile role, yada, yada, yada. We want someone with a degree. Would that have held me back? Maybe.
Right. I as a result of me coming back to school, I'm looking at going for a PhD now.
Great.
And I'm looking for colleges. I think Amherst is on the list without walls, because my one of my biggest concerns is I'm still an active stand-up comic.
Yeah.
still a working actor. You know, we're on strike now, but hopefully
Right.
it'll end
Get
soon.
that resolved soon, right?
Yes, hopefully. But people are recommending different institutions. I would love to stay in New York. People are recommending online options.
Yep.
I know I want to go, but the thing that worries me is I hear with people going for their PhDs, you disappear. Like you crawl into an academic hole.
Yeah.
So much work writing this dissertation and such, and you may not be able to surface it. I don't know if I could afford spiritually, familially.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could afford to disappear. So that's a concern. The online option is definitely a thing. So now, that being said, I wonder also, would the PhD credentials be able to help me in any way, right? It won't. I write better. I'm more intentional in my writing.
Sure.
For me, I want to make people call me Dr. Kevin or Dr.com. I want to make people do that, right? So that's just a blast. That's just hilarious to me. It's something I wish, I wish my mother, I know my mother would be looking down, smiling.
Oh, yeah.
With so many things that you've accomplished in your life, what's left? What's next? Do you have any unchecked off things on your bucket list?
You know what? Not really, to be honest. For me, I love what I've done in my career, and I've always just kind of let the game come to me, right? And let's see what happens. But I've been in one World Series. I've been in the playoffs. I know all these amazing athletes, right? But that's not part of my business. But I know the owners. I just love being able to help. So right now, I do a lot of consulting for sports properties. And I just love walking in there and helping everybody. Say, look, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've been in some really bad situations. Here's how I can help you. Here's how I can help your organization. And it's fun. I really enjoy that. Now, if that said, I'm a lifelong Knicks fan, right? So if they called me and said, hey, we need you to be the president of the Knicks or president of Madison Square Garden to run the business, which, again, a friend of mine already has that job, right? Dave Hopkinson, if you're listening, I'm not trying to take your job, buddy. But if something like that came along where it was just one of those too good of an opportunities to turn down, sure. I'd be happy to throw my hat back in the ring. But for now, I absolutely love what I do. I get a chance to work out of my house on Cape Cod. My kids both live in Boston. My grandkids are up there. Like, it's good. It's good. There's nothing left on my bucket list that I haven't seen that I could I really need to do that. For me, what I really get a biggest kick out of is mentoring. Someone asked me not long ago, how many different people have worked under your tree? They talk about coaching trees in sports, right? How many people are in your tree that have gone on to be at least a vice president somewhere? I was like, I never went back. And so I went back and started putting it together. I think it's somewhere in the 75 range. Right? There's someone who is the commissioner of a league that used to work for me. There's multiple CMOs. There's presidents of teams, presidents of leagues that used to work for me that I was their mentor. I hired them. I trained them, right? I love that. That to me was always the best part of what I did in this entire business was identify talent, train, develop, build relationships with them, and then nurture them so that they can go on to be successful. The line I always tell, and it's funny, someone just repeated this to me the other day. Says, you told me that years ago. I'm like, well, I still say it. I hope to work for you someday. Just remember me when I'm about to retire and I need a gig, right? And you can throw me a bone. And I use that line for 30 years. But people remember it. They're like, you always told me that you'd be happy to work for me someday. I'm like, yes, my job is to get you there. So that's kind of what the ethos of me is, really. I just love helping people. It's a long answer to your question, but I wouldn't think there's anything left on my bucket list unless somebody got a job as a president somewhere and then they wanted to hire me and they used to work for me. So that whole story comes true where someone winds up hiring me. That would be funny. But other than that, I'm good, man. It's been a great run.
Absolutely. Okay. So first of all, thank you. Thank you so much for your time. You're dropping some real solid jewels on this interview. So thank you. Thank you for that.
Appreciate that.
So last question is going to be, do you have any advice? What do you what do young people need to hear before we wrap up this interview?
I think it goes back to something we were talking about earlier. You need mentors in your life, right? Whether it's personally, spiritually, professionally, academically, you need mentors. And it takes work. Like, you have to find the right people who will provide the right guidance. So everybody has friends, right? Like you talked about earlier, like in high school, like you've got your friends, right? At some point you have to realize, are people helping you or hurting you, right? Are they advancing you so you can go where you need to be and be the best you? If not, it's a tough decision, but you've got to be able to break away and move on. And I've always told people the most important thing you can do is surround yourself with the right mentors or people that will make you the best you that you can be. And I've been fortunate enough that, yeah, have there been some people that weren't so good? Yes. And I always say I learned more from them on what not to do and how to better treat people because they didn't treat us well. So there's a lot of learning either way, but you have to look at everything as learning, and you got to have mentors that you can call out and, hey, .com. I just need to pick your brain for something. Tell me, am I crazy? I just need to run this by you because I trust you. And I get probably 5 calls like that a week minimum of people just looking and say, hey, can I just run this by you? Am I crazy? Does this make sense to you? Or how should I handle this? Great. And I used to do the same. I still reach out to my mentors, just check in. How you doing? What's happening? I mean, it's probably the most important thing you could do. Again, personally, professionally, academically, spiritually, whatever it is that you need, all of the above. That's probably my biggest piece of advice for everybody that I've been given for a long time.
Outstanding. And on that note, I'm going to say, Lou, thank you so much. The interview was a pleasure. It was an honor meeting you, a pleasure meeting you. And thank you for joining us on Tutors, Mentors in the City.
Nope, my pleasure. I'm glad you invited me. And, I look forward to future conversations, Kevin.
Absolutely. So hopefully I'll see you on the next one. All right.
All right. Sounds good.